Hi, welcome to Superhero Rundown. I'm Jess, and today we're looking at the bulletproof black man, Luke Cage. We're going to be discussing some pretty heavy stuff today, and I'm not going to be pulling my punches, so get ready. I want to make something clear before we begin. My only experiences with black culture is growing up with friends in a mostly black neighborhood, dating one black person, and currently residing in a mostly black complex. Why am I telling you this? Because I was close to black culture. I stayed up late wondering if my boyfriend was going to get shot by the cops while coming home. But that's as close as I'll ever be to black culture because of my white privilege. And it's this white privilege that's going to explain to you why Luke Cage is so important, especially when it came out. Why hashtag Black Lives Matter is an important movement. And why y'all gotta stop being assholes to people of color. I'm looking at you, guy with the itchy comment finger. I want you to wait until I'm done. And then you can comment on why you, a white guy, are wrong because you didn't listen to a goddamn thing I just said. So before I get into Luke Cage, let me establish a few things. Specifically, let's talk about the Barbershop, Trayvon Martin, and Michael Brown's shootings, and explain why Luke Cage is so important throughout. We're also like psychologists. The barbershop is a place you come to unwind and build self-esteem. You got brothers coming in with high self-esteem, and we maintain that. Or you got brothers coming in with low self-esteem, and we hook them up with their appearance and give them pep talks and stuff like that, and make it a place for them to come back and express themselves. We help to raise each other right and move forward. From the very beginning of Luke Cage, we open in the barbershop of Pops, the Switzerland of Harlem. No one is supposed to go there to do violence. It's a pillar of the community. Fader brings up that the barbershop is a place of pride and a reflection across generations, which is also evident in the series. Luke works in the shop sweeping up hair, and Pop treats customers, from the kids of the neighborhood to Cottonmouth himself. He talks to kids about staying out of trouble, and then it all gets destroyed in the second episode. Pop's Switzerland gets shot up because of a gun-toting gangster being all uppity. And the sense of community is destroyed until Luke Cage puts it back together. Luke Cage is the hero they need, despite not wanting the moniker. After Pop's death, Luke targets Cottonmouth's businesses, complete with Wu-Tang Clan. We see what he's capable of with a hoodie and a car door. He takes the money from the villain's warehouse and...
Why do you think so many people get grandma's house without having to fill out extra paperwork or hire a lawyer? You pay the bills, people shut up and get on with things.
But it's not always fun in games.
For Black lives to matter, Black history and Black ownership must also matter.
At one point in season 1, Luke finds himself in a predominantly white neighborhood, and y'all know what that means. The cops are going to harass him while he's trying to figure out how to get these bullets out of him. And that brings us to Trayvon Martin and the meaning behind Luke Cage's hoodie. The Netflix series trades in the ensemble for a less flashy gray hoodie, one that becomes increasingly tattered as the show progresses. That iconography has become an explicit symbol for Black America following the 2012 death of Trayvon Martin, who was wearing a similar sweatshirt when George Zimmerman fatally shot him. Zimmerman, a local neighborhood watch volunteer and murderer, believed that the attire made the 17-year-old look suspicious. In a 911 call placed before Martin's death, the man claimed that he had feared for his life, all over a hood. The trauma felt by the Black community during an era when injustice dominates the news cycle permeates Luke Cage, which is greatly indebted to the blaxploitation genre that inspired the comics. Unless you've been living under a rock for the most part, you know the story of Trayvon Martin. You know what it means to be a black man in America. Unless you're racist, in which case, let me spell it out for you. On February 26, 2012, a neighborhood watch volunteer fatally shoots an unarmed 17-year-old named Trayvon Martin. The volunteer argues self-defense and is acquitted. Martin was wearing a hoodie, and the volunteer said he looked suspicious. The hoodie has been recognized as a symbol in specific communities, as a specific identity, but more importantly, it has become associated with resisting systematic oppression. This symbol is exemplified by the violence that Luke Cage endures throughout the show, most notably when he is shot by the police in multiple episodes. After each incident, Cage goes about his business without so much as a scratch on his body. All that is left of the violence that clings to Cage are the holes in his hoodie. As the storyline progresses, you will start to notice, in one of the episodes, that the people on the street are wearing hoodies with bullet holes in them. This symbol is significant because Cage became a weapon against unfair distributions of power. The people on the street no longer had to fear being shot by the police because the police had to answer to Luke Cage. And it's the hoodie in the show that nods to Trayvon Martin, other victims, and the hashtag Black Lives Matter movement. And I could sit here all week and tell you only some of their stories. Philando Castile, Eric Garner, Walter Scott, Freddie Gray, Sandra Bland. The list is long. Too long. And when Misty even suggests justice against Cottonmouth in the show...
The system will win.
Forget the system. Arrests lead to indictments, and indictments lead to pleas. There's always a bigger fish, a bigger wrangle. Slap on the wrist. Boom. Right back in business.
Luke is definitely not buying the right way of justice, and who can blame him? By the end of season 1, Luke is on the run himself.
We need to be going after Willis Stryker.
Well, then why is Luke Cage running?
He's a black man being chased by the cops with special bullets. Accused of killing a cop, and you asking why he's running. Come on.
And that is powerful. For all of Luke Cage's bulletproof skin, he's still a black man in a hoodie. And bulletproof, heroic, and anything else you want to label him always comes second to being a black man in America. On August 9th, 2014, Michael Brown, an 18-year-old unarmed black man, was killed by a police officer. His body was in the street for 4 hours, and after the shooting, there were protests in Ferguson, Missouri, where this took place. The protests helped solidify the Black Lives Matter movement, which was formed after the death of Trayvon Martin and his shooter's acquittal. On November 24th, 2014, the county prosecutor says that the officer who shot Brown will not be indicted, and protests turned violent. On March 4th, 2015, the Department of Justice sadly also does not prosecute the officer responsible. But they do release a scathing report on the way that the police and the courts treat black people in the community. No fucking shit! Here's the wake-up call. White people. Racism did not end with desegregation. We've still got a long way to go. To think that we don't is hilariously evil and morally repugnant. If you are racist, get yourself to a fucking library and get a book on black history, or read about the prison system and the new Jim Crow. Don't tell me that racism is over, you racist piece of garbage. But there was some good news from the Brown case. 2 of the 3 city council members newly elected are black, now holding half of the 6 seats. And yet, while economic revitalization efforts have stalled, the social justice push to reduce police prosecution of Ferguson's most vulnerable citizens has been fairly effective. Ferguson has never promoted a black officer above sergeant, but following the resignation of its white police chief, Thomas Jackson, the city replaced him with Miami officer Delrish Moss. He hired more black and female officers, as well as the city's first Hispanic officer who could translate for Spanish-language residents. They hired a new municipal judge, and legislation is signed to limit the city's ability to profit from traffic tickets and court fines. All of this was in 2015, and in 2017, a federal judge approved a wrongful death settlement for $1.5 million to Michael's parents. In 2018, Wesley Bell defeated the 28-year incumbent in a stunning upset for the Democratic primary. Bell took office in January 2019 after running unopposed in the November election. But some things have not gotten better. Even with the groundswell of activism, the reforms, and the influx of redevelopment dollars, life is not better for low-income and black Ferguson residents 5 years after Michael Brown's death. In fact, by a number of measures, including murder rate, black poverty rate, and small business revenue, it's worse, and the lack of progress can be seen most vividly on and around West Florissant Avenue. Oh, and you think it's just Ferguson? In 2015, for the first time, U.S. suburbs had more poor residents than the cities. But Ferguson is a particularly disturbing prototype. Having inspired people around the globe to rise up against police brutality, it has fallen prey to deeper problems. Structural failures of design and planning, implemented long ago. In a city oppressed by systematic racism, the infrastructure and policy, literal systems, are perhaps just as insidious. So, policing now. Where the fuck do I even start? Deadly police shootings are still going at a steady pace, and still few officers are charged for those shootings. The public is now divided on the issue, even with body cameras clipped to thousands of officers. The line is usually white people, and conservatives who trust the cops, and black people and liberals who don't. Since the beginning of 2015, on-duty law enforcement officers have fatally shot more than 4,400 people, or around 985 annually, with little variation from one year to the next, according to a Washington Post database that is relied on by government officials, researchers, and activists. It is not clear whether those figures are higher or lower than before the Ferguson shooting because no one kept reliable data in 2014 or before. So what about... To clarify the failed promise of the series, Charity argues, there is no stark philosophical contrast between villain and hero. Cage, Stokes, Dillard, and Pop are all nostalgic for an older, respectable Harlem, where, in Stokes' recollection, people walked old ladies across the street. The term Black Lives Matter came into being in the aftermath of the July 2013 acquittal of the shooter of Trayvon Martin. You notice how I'm not personally naming the shooters? This is Black Lives Matter, not Shooters' Lives Matter. Die mad about it. Show some respect for the dead, who should be here today. If you want a good example of a Black Lives Matter movie that stars a man who would later become one of Marvel's great MCU villains, check out Ryan Coogler's Fruitvale Station, starring Michael B. Jordan as Oscar Grant. The name Black Lives Matter now refers, sometimes interchangeably, both to the chapter organizations set up by the three women who coined the phrase, as well as to the larger movement of organizations and individuals who rally under its banner. But you say, what about Dr. Martin Luther King? He wanted nonviolent protest, and these people should honor one of their own's legacy. Okay, but you aren't listening. People are dying in their homes, in jail, in the streets, and you still aren't listening. In the midst of the civil unrest, a vigorous public debate has ensued regarding the way police officers engage black neighborhoods, the militarization of police forces across the country, the doctrines regarding the proper use of force by law enforcement officials, and the variables at fault for creating such tension between predominantly black neighborhoods and the police. My opinion is that cops shouldn't have military-grade weapons of any kind. But what the hell do I know? I'm just a white person with a cultural sustainability degree. And this right here, Luke Cage and Black Lives Matter, this is a culture fighting for equality. A culture you white folks stole from their homeland, made slaves, then segregated, and currently are sort of fine with them being in prison and being gunned down while not being hostile. You should be ashamed of yourselves. Okay, let's talk about one white guy. Mike Huckabee, who can literally drown in a forest fire because holy shit, what a piece of garbage. When I hear people scream Black Lives Matter, I think of course they do. But all lives matter. It's not that any life matters more than another. That's the whole message I think Dr. King tried to present, and I think he'd be appalled with the notion that we're elevating some lives above others. Here, Huckabee not only criticized the actions and behaviors of the protesters, he also criticized the very rhetoric they used to champion their cause. He fundamentally missed the point of the Black Lives Matter movement when he accused protesters of attempting to elevate black lives above all others. The phrase Black Lives Matter intends to draw attention to social injustices that relegate black lives to the status of second-class citizens, not claim that black lives are more important than other lives. Look, if you ever see this, Mike Huckabee, because you seem like the kind of guy who would actually Google himself, I want you to know, go fuck yourself. Martin Luther King Jr. said that a riot is the language of the unheard to Mike Wallace, quite famously in an interview. So, Black Lives Matter protesting? Dr. King's legacy. Ferguson rioting after police left an 18-year-old black man dead on the street for 4 hours? Justified. Wallace asked King about the Black Power movement and the increasing vocal minority of blacks who disagreed with his strategy of nonviolent resistance. While vowing to never change his basic idea that nonviolence is the most potent weapon available to the black people in the struggle for freedom and justice, King nonetheless declared that Black Power and the urban riots of the 1960s were reactions to the reluctance of white power to make the kind of changes necessary to make justice a reality for the black person. King's primary concern that day was America's failure to hear the economic plight of the black poor. He also insisted that social turmoil would not end unless whites in America listened and responded. So yeah, even Dr. King knew this would continue because white people in America are not listening or responding. I mean, not in a constructive way. Look, I'm not here to call out politics, but when your rhetoric harms a minority group of any kind, you need to take a look at yourself and ask, if my kid was black/queer/transgender or any other minority, would I still be okay with this? If your answer is yes, congratulations, you suck and you're a terrible person. If your answer is no, good for you! You should probably change your politics, you giant piece of crap. Nevertheless, King's legacy is an appropriate lens to engage Black Lives Matter because of his prominence in the American public imagination. He has become the exemplar by which American society measures all protest movements, especially those focused on racial justice. Thus, Black Lives Matter, as an organization seeking racial justice for Black people, has the burden of responding to King's legacy or risks being delegitimized and disregarded in the American public discourse. What I'm saying is, violence against Black bodies is a matter of law and custom. Most Black people are shot at and they ask questions later, if at all.
Not every situation calls for your patented approach of shoot first, shoot later, shoot some more, and then when everybody's dead, try to ask a question or two.
Police have taken into custody actual white domestic terrorists, and I swear if you tell me that these white boy shooters aren't terrorists in the comments, I will ban you from my channel so fucking fast.
I don't understand.
Look, any weapon that the police and military has eventually ends up on the street.
But Jess, you protest with all the vigor of a 2-year-old shitting themselves. The state isn't anti-black. Okay, white person. Within this anti-black world then, Black Lives matter negatively to the state. The state, acting as a form of absolute divine sovereignty, is a divine racist. And a world wherein the state as God is a white racist requires, on the part of those of us who have been kissed by the sun, a different disposition, one that affirms the positive mattering of Black lives at all costs. This God is a socio-political manifestation of restraint that at best holds back the mobility, creativity, and freedom of Black people, and at worst eliminates them as affronts to the status quo, which is to say, kills them both existentially and biologically. But no, it's the Black people who do everything wrong. They were unarmed. That white boy who's a white supremacist and shot up a Black church, he's mentally disturbed. No, he's a terrorist. Stop protecting white people. You are just as accountable by sitting idly by as the state is in prosecuting Black people. Here's what needs to happen. Any law that wants to claim racial or human justice needs to transform the status quo we currently have. All reform and justice is achieved through the people who join justice movements to disrupt the system. And when that happens and the movement succeeds, then the laws change. Our laws have failed to achieve racial justice because racism has shaped our law's DNA. The United States was established and constituted in law that valued property over humanity. From our nation's beginning, slavery was the foundation of social and economic life and was completely interwoven into the passions and prejudices of the American people. The new Constitution made ownership of property basic to individual freedom. The sanctity of property rights was a powerful bulwark of slavery. The nation's economic growth and territorial expansion was achieved largely through slave labor and the dispossession of non-white peoples. Racism and the narrative of Black inferiority were essential to the hegemony of a constitution that claimed to establish justice and promote the general welfare while its provisions valued property over human life.
And what about the law, Luke?
But when has the law ever really protected us?
So as a final word on police in the context of Black Lives Matter, demilitarize them. Please. Also retrain them, because I'm so sick and tired of seeing more dead people who are not white. More dead white people, please. Let's talk about the NFL and Colin Kaepernick for a hot second. As some people may or may not know, Kaepernick kneeled during the national anthem at a game, then kept doing it, and basically got blacklisted from the NFL for doing it. Because people's feelings are football can't be political. We could talk about the Kansas City Chiefs, who are actually from Missouri, and the Washington Redskins, who are actually from the District of Columbia, another time. And in an event that reflected, however dimly an impact, the Smith-Carlos Olympic protest, San Francisco 49er quarterback Colin Kaepernick refused to stand for the national anthem before several preseason NFL games in what he said was a gesture of solidarity with the Black Lives Matter protests against police violence. More athletes, black and white, joined Kaepernick in his protest, while more Americans, most but not all of them white, expressed varying levels of antagonism toward Kaepernick, and those who likewise kneeled or sat during the anthem. To this day, the NFL is still trying to blackball him, and I, for one, am proud of him. Let's talk about black women in Luke Cage for a moment. Both Misty Knight and Mariah Dillard are the stars of the show. But over both season 1 and 2, it's all about Black Mariah. She straight up murders her cousin Cottonmouth and takes on his empire for herself. And even though she dies by the end of season 2, Alfre Woodard delivers. Mariah wants to keep Harlem black. The show goes to great lengths to show her two-faced nature. In one particular scene, at an event organized to feed local children, Mariah strolls down a line of neighborhood children she knows by name and strokes their hair so that the gathered press can see just how much she cares. Moments after she steps away to meet with her crime lord cousin, she immediately has her assistant squirt antibacterial disinfectant on her hands, and her gleaming smile turns into a stony grimace. She doesn't really care about the children. She just wants power. Misty is not sold short either. She initially suspects Cage, but finally comes around on him and helps him in the second season. Unlike the majority of detectives in comic book media who can't seem to figure out the obvious fact that their love interests are superheroes, Misty puts two and two together pretty quickly, and Luke Cage gets on with letting her be a compelling character with strong motives in a narrative arc that are uniquely hers. Luke Cage doesn't just have black men in prominent roles, but also black women.
You don't need to be bulletproof to be a superhero. Black women have always had superpowers.
Often, making a television show or a movie diverse means including one or two characters who check off a box. The moment you have one black Avenger, people can no longer critique the movie for lacking in representation of black people. The second Avengers movie inducted two black men onto the team. Hey Falcon, hey War Machine. But where did that leave black women? Luke Cage expands the scope of Marvel's universe to include a world where different types of complex black women exist. Some of them are good, some of them are bad, but they finally have a seat at the table. Not only is Luke Cage the blackest show we've seen since the premiere of Blackish, but it doesn't rely on stereotypes about black people, especially black women. The characters aren't unusually strong, angry, and difficult, nor do they fall into simple one-dimensional supporting characters. Cage turns the stereotypes on its head by showing a crucial lens into nuanced characters with their own stories, narratives, and flaws. To put it bluntly, we needed Misty Knight, we needed Claire Temple, we needed Mariah Dillard. Big deal, representation. Why is the show important anyway?
Young man, I've had a long day. I'm tired.
Luke Cage is very important, as is any black superhero. Black Panther is up there, but Luke Cage is a street show, designed from the very beginning to show you black life, the brutality of America, and most importantly, why we need a bulletproof black man. Luke Cage's first season and all of its various components, the blaxploitation genre it twists, the western feel in its bones, the mobster flicks it idolizes, coalesced around one idea: the question of what it will take for a black hero to survive in a system that wishes he would disappear. Even in its mildest moments, the world that Luke Cage lives in is extraordinarily brutal. There's a clawing sense of helplessness, a sinking feeling that no matter what good Cage does in Harlem, if he arouses even one blush of suspicion, New York City's entire police force will be determined to kill him. Cage has more legitimate alibis than Marvel has superheroes, but he's always a suspect. It becomes clear to everyone that Cage is bulletproof, but that doesn't stop cops, or anyone really, from trying to shoot him. They even seek out special bullets to hurt him. The great thing about this series, it's a narrative where the black people have agency. They are not slaves and they are not the hired help. They are fleshed out, they live, they die, they have lives outside of just their skin color. Luke Cage is the invulnerable superhero we need with the racially charged political climate we currently have. Of course, Trayvon Martin haunts us all, the showrunner said. My thing about that was showing that heroes can wear hoodies too. From the standpoint of seeing that fact that somebody saw him as being suspect because he had a hoodie on, we're flipping that and saying, look, heroes come from everywhere. Yes, heroes, black men in hoodies can also be heroic. And so rather than thinking that somebody is a suspect, they could be coming to save you too. Think about it. Who are the most prominent black superheroes? War Machine, who's really a sidekick to Tony Stark. Falcon, who's Captain America's sidekick. Black Panther, who runs a fictional country despite headlines. Black Lightning, who retired then came back and can't be irresponsible like the Green Arrow. And Luke Cage. All of them have to fit the narrative of what's expected of them, just like President Barack Obama had to be perfect in everything, because he was a black president, and black always comes before everything else. While Superman, Batman, and others often take an entire city under their wing, black superheroes like Luke Cage and Black Lightning only look out for their neighborhood. Why is that? The answer lies in America itself. For too long, America has been a divided country, with black Americans deemed unimportant and low-rung next to white Americans. Because of that segregation, we have historically looked out for each other, since no one else would help us. Interestingly enough, the same racial and social politics of our country has bled into comics, whether people realize it or not. Too often, black superheroes are called in out of necessity, not choice. Their neighborhoods are overrun with crime and lawlessness, and the other superheroes aren't going to help. Therefore, it's up to black superheroes to take the reins and act as their neighborhood's regulator. And in case you were wondering, this is also a historical thing. Black superheroes are often othered in the same way alien superheroes like Martian Manhunter are othered. They're seen as otherworldly, exotic, and somehow too difficult for the masses to understand. But much of this is taught ignorance. In order for many of America's racist practices to be kept up, blackness had to be othered and distorted. Historically, the amount of advertisements featuring black stereotypes and the amount of shows, movies, and vaudeville acts that featured blackface show how much American life functioned on the existence of this distortion. For blackness to be seen as untouchable, black people had to be viewed as untouchable. Thus, black superheroism itself is viewed as unimaginable, a paradox that can only come about if the superhero in question has a link to crime himself, or if the superhero has a white superhero friend who can vouch for him. Importantly, even if he doesn't seem as high stakes as the Avengers or the Guardians of the Galaxy, he isn't out to save the universe, and he doesn't wear a flashy costume. He rarely even uses his superpowers, which are presented more as a behavioral quirk than a defining characteristic of his personality. The man is deeply flawed, haunted by his past, but that's precisely what makes him so heroic. He's working on it, struggling to accept himself in the face of a world that keeps pushing him toward invisibility. Not to mention, it takes on toxic black male stereotypes. But superhero masculinity has its own imaginative limits. Luke Cage, the series, admires Pop's policies of de-escalation, but embracing them would mean no fight scenes. And then what? Every so often, Cage expresses ambivalence about violence, or wonders whether the collateral damage of his war with Stokes is worth it. These are reasonable questions, but the series reflexively and repeatedly dismisses them. Instead, someone always pops up to goad Cage into hitting more people, often by questioning his masculinity. And in case you thought this was only about the show, more recent police shootings and incidents of police brutality still draw local attention and activist outrage, but they often fail to attract the same level of public attention they did from 2014 to 2016. At the federal level, the Trump administration has halted efforts to enact police accountability measures. And years into racial justice activists' fight for structural reform, many of the systems that shield officers from accountability remain in place. In short, it appears that public interest in these problems is waning, along with the momentum to push for police reform, even as the need for these changes remain. And police brutality should be treated as a public health issue. The minute they hear it's a black man or someone with a mental health problem, they bring out the guns. Literally. On a much lighter note, at least Danny Rand is Danny Rand in this series.
The glowing fist is the least powerful thing about you, especially up here. Stillness is power? Nah, money is power. That's what flows. That's the only thing to respect, trust me.
I will say, though, I do like that Luke learns the move Calm Mind from Danny Rand, but in all seriousness, they learn from each other. Luke learns to not be angry when he fights, and Danny learns that Batman really is the best route. Money talks, just buy the damn Nightshade warehouse. Who knew it took Jessica, Luke, and Matt to make fun of him for being a MacGuffin? But I'll leave you with this. And despite their beginnings, Luke Cage and Black Lightning are now staunch heroes, providing much-needed commentary on police brutality, gang violence, lack of apathy among law enforcement and the government, racism, and other ills that affect Black Americans as a whole. However, they're also getting their message out to those beyond the Black community as well. Their powerful characterizations and messages strike deep in the hearts of anyone watching, no matter their skin color. This is Michael Harriot's letter to Trayvon Martin on what would have been his 25th birthday. Dear Trayvon, today would have been your 25th birthday, and as I write this letter, I am listening to Aretha Franklin sing Never Grow Old. If I was predisposed to a belief in an eternal paradise, I would imagine that Queen Aretha hummed this hymn when she spotted you at her welcoming ceremony. Perhaps she even handed you this letter, but because I am not given to such fantasies, I am listening to the Queen's captured voice as she croons. I have heard of a land on the faraway strand, 'tis a beautiful home of the soul. Built by Jesus on high, where we never shall die, 'tis a land where we never grow old. A 25th birthday might not be as significant a milestone as one's 18th or 21st. Sadly for your mother, Sabrina Fulton, for you and for all of us, you only had the opportunity to celebrate 17 birthdays. The rest were stolen from you, from Sabrina, from us. I've always wondered why we don't celebrate birthdays by giving presents to the mother. Isn't a birthday actually an anniversary for something she did? After all, she's the one who actually gifted the world with a life. All the birthday celebrant did is live. Why are they celebrated? Now I know why. Because for a Black boy in America, living is an accomplishment. Our simple existence is a reason to celebrate. It would be easy to remember you as a martyr and make a ghost out of your memory. Instead, today we celebrate your accomplishments. We honor the fact that you achieved 17 years of existence, that your purloined life continues to have meaning. You are not simply a symbol of the scourge of police brutality. You are alive. You are. There is a phenomenon that most Black boys and girls spend their lives trying to avoid. I call it involuntary suicide, the act of unintentionally and unwillingly giving one's life. It happened when Philando Castile reached for his firearm license, when Sandra Bland decided to smoke a cigarette, when Bottom Jeans sat watching TV in his own living room, when a Tatiana Jefferson peered out of her window, when Eric Garner breathed. It hovers over all of us, waiting in the shadows. You are a living, breathing, promise-filled thing who turned toward your oppressor and looked the monster in the eyes. In an instant, with nothing but a pocket full of Skittles and a heart filled with the resolve we hope is inside us all, you decided that you would not go quietly into the night. When this unjust land of milk and honey mustered up all the evil it could offer and came for you, you offered it a fight. And you won. Make no mistake, you won. So we celebrate. Maybe America is a paradise. Even those of us who manage to somehow elude America's unrelenting, devouring death chase understand that our success at survival is not of our own doing. We know that our continued existence is as arbitrary as the unconsenting suicides that we luckily escaped. And that is why we celebrate your birthday. That's why we adorn ourselves in hoodies. That's why we keep fighting. Because you are us, and we are you. Trayvon, as long as Black people exist, you will never die. And Black people will always exist. But we too know a land where we never grow old.